Today we are going to revise all 5 stories that are there in the syllabus of class 12 this year. And the first and foremost story is story Atithi or guest, right? Guest in Hindi we know guest as Atithi, जिसे हम मेहमान भी कहते हैं, by Rabindranath Tagore. First and foremost, we are going to discuss the plot of the story. Plot development is basically the storyline, okay, outline of the story, what all important events happen in the story. The story Atithi by Rabindranath Tagore revolves around Tarapada, a restless teenage boy with wanderlust. Now, one thing that I would like to mention here from this story, the character sketch of Tarapada is the most important and it can be asked as a 10 marker. Now, who is Tarapada? Tarapada is portrayed as a restless, amiable teenage boy who runs away from home repeatedly, seeking to explore the world. He joins various groups such as theatre troupes and acrobatic groups, but never stays in one place for a long time. Then he has his encounter with Motilal Babu. Tarapada meets Motilal Babu, a wealthy landlord, and asks for a lift on his boat. Motilal Babu, along with his wife Annapurna and daughter Charu Shashi, are returning to their village. Now, life with Motilal's family. Tanapada impresses Motilal and Annapurna with his charm and skills. He befriends the boatmen, helps with chores, and entertains them with stories and songs. However, Charu Shashi is jealous of the attention Tarapada receives. Settling in the village. Tarapada accompanies the family in their village and wins over the villagers with his charm. Motilal and Annapurna decide to marry him to Charu Shashi to temper her wild nature. The arranged marriage. Motilal and Annapurna want to take responsibility for Tarapada's education and believe marriage to Charu will consolidate their relationship. They contact Tarapada's family, who are happy about the prospect of him settling down. But Tarapada's departure is how the story ends. On the wedding day, as preparations are underway and his family arrives, Tarapada disappears, giving in to his wanderlust once again. Now, if we talk about the themes of the story, first and foremost is hospitality. The story explores the theme of hospitality, particularly the Indian tradition of treating guests with utmost respect. That is why the story has been titled as Guest also. Motilal Babu's family welcomes Tarapada and provides him food and shelter. Another theme which runs through the story is transient nature of life. Tagore emphasizes the impermanence of relationships and the fleeting nature of human experiences. Tarapada's character embodies this theme as he is unable to stay in one place for long and constantly seeks new experiences. Next theme is freedom versus domesticity. The story highlights the conflict between the desire for freedom and the responsibilities of domestic life. Tarapada's wanderlust clashes with the expectations of settling down and getting married. Another theme which can be seen in this story is social expectations. Tagore questions societal norms and expectations, particularly regarding marriage and the roles individuals are expected to play. Tarapada's rejection of marriage challenges these expectations and emphasizes the importance of individual freedom. Now, next is compassion. Despite initial hesitation, the family's eventual openness to understanding the guest's story illustrates a deeper connection born from empathy. Now, if we talk about the characters, first and foremost, Tarapada, I am highlighting the main points about these characters. Tarapada is a restless teenage boy who is always on the move. He is charming, amiable, and skilled in various arts. Tarapada represents the freedom of spirit and the desire to explore the world. Motilal Babu is a wealthy landlord who is kind and generous. He is impressed by Tarapada and wants to provide him with a stable life. Annapurna, Motilal Babu's wife, who is also kind and affectionate towards Tarapada. Charu Shashi is Motilal Babu's daughter, who is initially jealous of Tarapada but eventually accepts him. If we talk about the literary devices that have been used, first and foremost, imagery. Tagore uses vivid imagery to describe the landscapes and setting in the story. Then symbolism is used in this story, such as the concept of Atithi Devo Bhava, where guests are revered. Characterization is also important here. Tagore employs rich characterizations to explore the complexities of human relationships. Now, if we talk about the short questions, the important questions that can be asked from this story are: how does the presence of Tarapada impact the lives of the residents in the village? Discuss the significance of the title Atithi and its relevance to the story. Discuss the roles of Motilal Babu, Annapurna, and Charu Shashi in this story, means the characters also you can say. How does Tarapada's involvement in the theatre industry challenge the traditional norms of rural India? What was Tarapada's main characteristic that defined his behavior? Now, long questions. Explore the theme of hospitality in this story and how it is portrayed through the interactions between the characters. Reflect on the message or moral lesson that can be drawn from Atithi and how it resonates with contemporary society. How does Tarapada embody a sense of freedom and detachment from societal norms and expectations? How did this story Atithi end with regard to Tarapada's character? What made Tarapada an almost ascetic who was totally detached from society? Discuss the various troops that he joined. Tarapada, the central character in the short story Atithi, is a free soul who cannot be restrained by the bonds of society. Examine this statement. So, when I am giving you this list of questions, the purpose behind it is these are all important, or you can say possible questions that can be asked. If you are able to answer these questions, you may take it as a criteria to check yourself. If you are able to have sufficient points to write the answers of these questions, then you can say that yes, your story is prepared. Now, the next story is The Cookie Lady by Philip K. Dick. Introduction of Bernard Bubber Surly. Bubber, an overweight boy with a craving for cookies, regularly visits an old woman in the neighborhood, Mrs. Drew, for her treats. The strange relationship. Mrs. Drew asks Bubber to read aloud to her during his visits, claiming her eyesight is failing. As he reads, a strange transformation occurs. Mrs. Drew grows younger, seemingly feeding off Bubber's youthful energy. However, this transformation is only temporary. Now, parents' concern. Bubber's parents become concerned as he comes home exhausted after visiting Mrs. Drew. They dislike him spending time with her and limit his visits to one last time. Now, the last visit. Bubba informs Mrs. Drew that this will be his last visit. Distraught, she begs him to stay and read to her, moving her chair closer and touching his arm to intensify the rejuvenating effect. Mrs. Drew's transformation. Mrs. Drew undergoes a complete transformation, becoming a vivacious, dark haired beauty. Bubba, oblivious, finishes the cookies and leaves. Bubba's demise. Bubba struggles home, growing increasingly weak and ill. His parents find only a bundle of dry weeds blowing in the wind at their doorstep, implying that Mrs. Drew's rejuvenation drained Bubba's life force. Now look at the themes. First is exploitation and manipulation. The story highlights the theme of exploitation and manipulation of innocence. Mrs. Drew lures Bubba with her cookies and exploits his youth to rejuvenate herself without regard for the consequences to him. Appearance versus reality is the another theme. The cookies symbolize temptation and deception, masking Mrs. Drew's malevolent intentions. The story contrasts Edward's innocence with Mrs. Drew's malevolence. Loneliness and isolation. The Cookie Lady explores the theme of loneliness and isolation, exemplified by Mrs. Drew's solitary life in her dilapidated house. Parental responsibility. The story also touches on the responsibility of parents in guiding their children and protecting them from harm. Now, mainly, there are two characters in this story. One is Bernard Bubba Surly, a naive and trusting young boy who is drawn to Mrs. Drew's cookies and is unaware of her true intentions. He is overweight and easily tempted. Mrs. Drew, a seemingly kind elderly woman who is actually a sinister and supernatural entity that drains the youth and vitality of Bubba to rejuvenate herself. She is manipulative and predatory, using her apparent kindness to lure Bubba in. If we talk about the literary devices that have been used in this story, first and foremost is symbolism. Cookies symbolize temptation and deception, luring Bubba into Mrs. Drew's trap. Irony: Mrs. Drew appears as a kind, grandmotherly figure, but is actually a sinister entity. Imagery: the descriptions of Mrs. Drew's transformation and Bubba's deterioration create a sense of horror and unease. Foreshadowing: Bubba's exhaustion after visiting Mrs. Drew foreshadows the eventual draining of his life force. Now look at the 5 marks questions. How does Dick use the character of Mrs. Drew to challenge the typical image of a grandmotherly figure? In what ways do the cookies in this story function beyond simple treats? How does this story explore the theme of innocence versus evil, and what does it say about the vulnerability of the innocent? What role do Bubbles' parents play in this story, and how does their lack of involvement contribute to the tragic events? Now, if we talk about the long questions, important questions can be: how does Dick create an atmosphere of horror and suspense in this story, The Cookie Lady? Very important question. What does the ending of the story suggest about the consequences of unchecked desires and exploitation? How does Mrs. Drew exploit Bubber's innocence and craving for cookies for her own sinister intentions? In what ways does the story reflect a dystopian world of corruption and exploitation? What is the significance of the story's setting in an old, isolated, and dilapidated house? How does the story explore the theme of loneliness and isolation? And what are the interactive relationships that are portrayed as having good or bad influences on human beings? Now, the next story, There Will Come Soft Rains, written by Ray Bradbury. All right, so let's talk about the plot of the story. The first and foremost thing that we need to know about the story is that it has post-apocalyptic setting. In 2026, a natural catastrophe has devastated Allendale, California, leaving only one house standing. The house is fully automated, performing daily tasks despite the absence of its owners, right? In the house, we do not find any human being, but the working of the house is being done. Why? By the machines and robots, because the house is completely automated. Automated routine. The house continues its routines, making breakfast, cleaning, and reading poetry. Silhouettes on an exterior wall reveal the fate of the family. The dog's arrival and death. A dog suffering from radiation poisoning and starvation enters the house and dies. The house's automated systems efficiently dispose of the body. The fire. A tree branch crashes through a window, causing a fire. The house attempts to extinguish the fire, but it is ultimately consumed. Final echoes. The following morning, only one wall remains, endlessly repeating the date. Now, if we look at the themes of this story, the first and foremost is the destructive power of technology, nuclear war, or you can say, right? This story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of technology, particularly nuclear weapons. Bradbury wrote this story as a response to the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nature's indifference. This story and Sarah Taysdale's poem of the same name, uh, There Will Come Soft Rains, suggest nature is indifferent to humanity's fate. Technology's inability to protect. The automated house, despite its advanced technology, cannot save itself from destruction. Technology is neither good nor bad, it simply is. The illusion of progress. The house's routines highlight the futility of progress in the face of total destruction. Irony of technology. The house continues to function, but there is no one to benefit from it. If we talk about the characters, so here we find the house as one of the characters. The house functions as the main character, exhibiting automated systems and a detached adherence to routine. It symbolizes technology's potential and its limitations. Next is the family of silhouettes. The family is only present as silhouettes skew burnt onto the side of the house. These figures represent the human cost of nuclear war. The dog symbolizes the destruction of nature. Setting of this story, it is the post apocalyptic setting emphasizes the devastation caused by nuclear war. Symbolism, the house symbolizes technology and civilization. The fire symbolizes destruction and the uncontrollable forces of nature. And the silhouette symbolize the human cost of war. Irony, the automated house continues its routine in the absence of humans, highlighting the absurdity of technology without purpose. The story, which seems pessimistic, is actually very optimistic compared to the reality. Imagery. Bradbury uses vivid imagery to depict the desolate landscape and the house's automated functions. Look at the questions. Which activities are performed by the devices in the house at 7 o'clock? So I have tried to give in some points here because children usually find this story difficult. So the devices automatically prepare a full breakfast spread of eggs, bacon, toast, coffee, and milk, even though no one is there to eat it. They also give a regular weather update and remind the occupants of events. Who were the occupants of the house? Where are they now? They were McClellan family, consisting of parents and children. It seems the entire family has tragically perished in a nuclear explosion that has devastated the city. How did the house catch fire? How did it try to save itself? A windstorm caused a tree to crash into the kitchen window, toppling over cleaning fluids that shattered over the stove fire. The desperate house tried using sprinklers, sprays, and extinguishers, but ultimately failed to save itself from the raging fire. What is the significance of the title of this story? So, the title, There Will Come Soft Rains, is taken from Sarah Teasdale's poem, which talks optimistically about nature continuing to thrive beautifully even after humans have destroyed themselves completely. Using this poem's title signifies that despite humans wreaking devastating destruction through advanced technology like nuclear weapons, nature and life will ultimately endure and go on. It is an ironic comment on humanity's self destruction. Comment on the ending of this story. The ending shows the final irony of the house's advanced technology and devices trying so hard to preserve the house, but ultimately failing pathetically against the raw elemental power of nature in the form of wind and fire. This is evident in only a lone wall surviving the fire, which continues to repeat the date endlessly without any purpose, just like the technology had continued to function for no inhabitants. The ending signifies nature's supremacy over humanity's supposedly advanced scientific developments. What is special about the house in this story? The house in Ray Bradbury's There Will Come Soft Rains is a fully automated, smart home designed to cater to every need of its inhabitants. It is special because it operates independently, continuing its daily routine even though the human occupants are no longer alive. What functions does the house perform? The house performs a variety of functions such as preparing meals, cleaning itself, reading poetry, and providing weather updates. It wakes the family with an alarm, cooks breakfast, cleans the dishes, and sets up games for the children. Additionally, it maintains the lawn, waters the plants, and even reads a selection of poetry. What do the green snakes represent? In this story, the green snakes represent the streams of firefighting chemicals used by the automated house to combat the fire. Ray Bradbury anthropomorphizes the house and its functions. All right. Now, the next is story Indigo by Satyajit Ray. This is also one of the most important stories, right? Aniruddha Bose, the narrator, recounts his strange and unbelievable experience of spending a night in an old, lonely, dark bungalow. While sleeping in the bungalow, Aniruddha experiences a paranormal transformation, turning into a cruel indigo planter who died a century earlier. He finds his body altered, his clothes changed, and his voice deepened. Aniruddha, possessed by the indigo collector's mind, shoots the dog Rex. The next morning, he wakes up as himself with everything back to normal. This is the basic plot of the story. Now, look at the themes. First is colonial exploitation. The story reflects the exploitation of Indian farmers by British colonial rule and the oppressive economic practices that forced farmers into debt and poverty. The indigo plantation symbolizes the loss of cultural identity and autonomy among local farmers as they become reliant on foreign interests, threatening their traditional ways of life. Resilience and resistance is another theme. The farmers' courage and determination to resist colonial powers emphasize the human spirit's capacity to endure hardship. Next is social injustice. The story sheds light on social hierarchies and injustices, particularly the challenges faced by the lower classes, portraying the disparity between the wealthy and the impoverished and critiquing the systems that perpetuate inequality. Tradition versus modernity. Indigo explores the tension between traditional practices and the impact of modernity, where indigo farmers cling to their heritage while confronting changing economic and social landscapes influenced by colonialism. The introduction of new methods by British planters disrupts long standing practices. Next theme is cultural identity and heritage. The narrative reflects on the significance of cultural identity and the connection to land, tradition, and community, emphasizing how colonial powers attempted to undermine these aspects and the importance of preserving them. Another theme is, of course, supernatural. This story incorporates strange, mysterious, and paranormal experiences, creating suspense through the eerie and isolated setting of the bungalow and the protagonist's fear and confusion. The protagonist is possessed by the spirit of a greedy indigo planter. Now, characters here, two characters only are there in the story. One is Aniruddha Bose, who is a 29-year-old unmarried man working in an advertising agency in Calcutta, who is the protagonist and narrator of the story. He experiences a supernatural transformation in the dark bungalow. And next is the English indigo planter, a greedy and unjust man who exploited plantation workers for money. He is described as cruel and ruthless. His spirit possesses Aniruddha. Now, if we talk about the literary devices, of course, the story has supernatural elements. It incorporates strange, mysterious, and paranormal experiences. An ordinary man encounters extraordinary situations beyond rational understanding. Suspense and horror. Ray uses horror and suspense to maintain the reader's attention. The eerie and isolated setting of the bungalow contributes to the supernatural atmosphere. Foreshadowing. Bhola Babu's advice that the journey foreshadows Aniruddha's later troubles. Personification is used when the storm is personified as striking terror. Imagery is used to describe the hustle and bustle of Calcutta. Now look at the questions. What happens with Aniruddha in the dark bungalow? So while sleeping in the indigo planter's bungalow, Aniruddha felt his body transform completely. His skin turned pale, his voice changed to that of an Englishman, and the clothes he was wearing also changed. Though his mind was still conscious, his body was not in his control. What do you learn about the indigo planter? What kind of person was he? So, from Aniruddha's paranormal experience, we learn that the English indigo planter was a greedy and unjust man who exploited the plantation workers for money. He felt lonely as his wife and son had left him and he had no friends. His letters showed he had no peace of mind and expected no one to mourn his death. How is Indigo a supernatural story? So, Indigo by Satyajit Ray is a supernatural story depicting paranormal events experienced by the protagonist, Aniruddha Bose. While spending a night in an abandoned indigo planter's bungalow, Aniruddha undergoes a shocking transformation. His body is completely changed. He writes a letter in the voice of the English planter who dies years ago and shoots the planter's dog in a trance like state. When he wakes up the next morning, everything is back to normal. These strange happenings that defy logical explanation give the story a supernatural feel. The story follows all the conventions of supernatural genre. An ordinary man faces extraordinary situations beyond rational understanding. There is an eerie, isolated setting of the bungalow, and the events take place on the significant date of the planter's 100th death anniversary. The suspense and Aniruddha's fear and confusion add to the supernatural atmosphere. Ray's masterful storytelling makes the paranormal incidents seem convincing and real. Now, last but not the least, The Medicine Bag by Virginia Driving Hawksneve. If we talk about the setting of the story is set in Iowa, USA, in a modern urban setting, contrasting with a traditional Native American reservation in South Dakota. Martin, a teenage boy of mixed heritage, is initially embarrassed by his Sayuk's grandfather's unexpected visit from the reservation in South Dakota. He fears that his friends will no longer see him as cool once they meet his grandfather. Despite Martin's initial reluctance, his friends are captivated by his grandfather's stories and charm. The grandfather reveals the purpose of his visit to pass on the family's sacred medicine bag to Martin, the oldest male heir. The medicine bag symbolizes the family's history and traditions. Martin learns about his ancestry and the significance of the medicine bag. After his grandfather's death, Martin embraces his heritage and places sacred sage in the medicine bag, signifying his acceptance of his cultural legacy. Now, if we talk about the themes of this story, first and foremost is cultural identity. The story emphasizes the importance of embracing one's cultural heritage and being proud of who you are. Next is tradition versus modernity. The clash between the grandfather's traditional ways and Martin's modern lifestyle highlights the challenges of preserving cultural traditions in a contemporary world. Family and heritage. The story underscores the significance of family connections and the importance of passing down traditions and stories from one generation to the next. And next is acceptance. Martin's journey involves accepting his grandfather, his heritage, and ultimately himself. If we talk about the characters, we see Martin, a teenage boy of mixed Lakota, Sioux, and white heritage, who is initially embarrassed by his Native American roots but eventually embraces them. He is the narrator of the story. Next is grandfather Joe Ironshell, an 86-year-old Sioux man from South Dakota who represents tradition. He travels to visit his grandson and pass on the medicine bag. Then we come across Martin's parents also. They feel guilty for not bringing grandpa to their house sooner. And Martin's friends, they are initially a source of anxiety for Martin, but they end up being charmed by his grandfather. The story has many devices used, literary devices. First and foremost is symbolism, where the medicine bag symbolizes Native American culture, heritage, and tradition. There is a conflict also seen. It explores the conflict between tradition and modernity, as well as Martin's internal conflict as he grapples with his identity. Of course, this story explores themes of cultural identity, heritage, acceptance, and importance of family and tradition, which I have already discussed with you. And there is narrative perspective, as the story is told from Martin's point of view, which allows the reader to see his transformation. So the question is like central message of the story. It revolves around the importance of embracing one's cultural heritage and respecting family traditions. What does the medicine bag symbolize? The medicine bag is a powerful symbol of cultural heritage representing wisdom, traditions, and spiritual beliefs of Martin's ancestors. It represents the traditions, beliefs, and history of his ancestors. The bag itself is not just a physical object, it represents the traditions, beliefs, and history of his ancestors, right? Why is Martin initially embarrassed by his grandfather's visit? So, actually, Martin is caught between two worlds, his Native American roots and the contemporary American society that surrounds him. This duality is echoed in his initial embarrassment over his grandfather's arrival and the traditional practices associated with the medicine bag. Martin worries that the image of his Indian grandfather that he has built and shared with his friends might threaten his reputation. How does Martin's perception of his grandfather change throughout this story? As Martin evolves throughout the story, he begins to appreciate the importance of his heritage, culminating in a deeper understanding of the values embodied in the medicine bag. Martin begins to see his grandfather in a different light. What does Martin learn about his family history from his grandfather? He learns the significance of the medicine bag from his grandpa, who shares with him the story of how his father earned the name of Iron Shell during his vision quest. What are some of the themes explored? This has already been discussed elaborately. Cultural identity, familial bonds, generational differences, quest for acceptance are the themes that are explored in the story. How does the story illustrate the theme of tradition versus modernity? Of course, it is explored as Martin grapples with his desire to fit into contemporary American culture while simultaneously feeling the pull of his Native American heritage. What does Martin's acceptance of the medicine bag symbolize? So, it symbolizes his commitment to carrying forward his family's traditions, equipping him with the strength to navigate the complexities of his identity as it relates to his family history. It symbolizes the acceptance of himself and his heritage. So, this was all about the stories that you have. I hope you are able to have a better idea what are the points that need to be understood and learned from these stories, that if you incorporate in your answers, you are going to score really very good marks.